October 25, 1944. Off the coast of Samar, Philippine Sea. The first light of dawn breaks over a restless ocean. Waves crash against the thin hull of the destroyer USS Johnston, DD 557, painting her deck with salt and foam. The horizon burns with the rising sun. Yet to the west, another fire glows, unnatural and foreboding. On the bridge, Commander Ernest E. Evans, a stocky Oklahoman of Cherokee descent, squints through his binoculars. His face is carved by war, his expression unreadable. He lowers the glasses slowly. "Gentlemen," he says to his officers, his voice calm but edged with steel. There they are. Out of the morning mist, the silhouettes of giants emerge. The Imperial Japanese Navy's center force, led by Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita. Battleships, cruisers, and destroyers stretch across the horizon. Towering above them, the monstrous super battleship Yamato, bristling with 18.1-inch guns, the largest ever mounted on a warship. The sea seems to shudder beneath their advance. Johnston is part of Taffy 3, a small escort group of 6 escort carriers, 3 destroyers, and 4 destroyer escorts. Vessels never meant to face such power. They were here to support the landings at Leyte Gulf, providing air cover for soldiers storming the Philippines. None aboard expected to meet the full might of the Japanese fleet. "Report," Evans snaps. "Radar contacts confirmed. Multiple capital ships closing fast. Range 20 miles. The Combat Information Center buzzes with tension. Men look at each other. This can't be real. The Japanese fleet was supposed to be shattered, retreating, not bearing down upon them with fury. Evans knows the truth before anyone else speaks it. Taffy 3 is trapped. Outgunned, outnumbered, outranged, but not out of the fight. He turns to his helmsman. "Helm, come to course 265, flank speed." To the gunnery officer, "Prepare for surface action." To his crew, "All hands, battle stations." The klaxon howls. Men scramble to their posts. Shells are loaded, torpedoes armed. Steam hisses through pipes as the destroyer lunges forward. Every man aboard Johnston understands what this means. Against battleships and cruisers, a destroyer is nothing more than a knife against a fortress. But Evans doesn't hesitate. As he steps out onto the open bridge, wind tearing at his khaki shirt, he shouts to his men below, "We're going in. We're going to attack." The crew exchange stunned looks, but no one questions him. The Johnston's engines roar, her bow slicing through white-capped water as she charges into the inferno. The battle off Samar has begun. Shell splashes bloom around the USS Johnston like geysers from the underworld. The sea erupts in fountains of flame and steel as 18-inch shells from the Yamato scream overhead. Each one lands with the force of an earthquake. The concussion rattles teeth, buckles knees, and rains hot shrapnel across the decks. Evans grips the railing, eyes fixed forward. His destroyer darts between plumes of smoke and spray like a hunted animal. Yet he looks calm, almost serene. "Keep zigzagging," he orders. "Make them waste their ammunition." Inside the engine room, sweat and heat mix with the acrid smell of oil. Chief Engineer Lieutenant J.G. Bob Hagan wipes grime from his brow. "We're pushing 34 knots, Captain. She won't hold this long." "She'll hold," Evans replies, eyes still on the horizon. The Japanese line grows clearer through the haze. Cruisers Kumano, Suzuya, Chikuma, and Chokai. Their decks bristling with turrets and torpedo launchers. Towering behind them, Yamato glides like a floating city. Each of her guns could obliterate a destroyer with a single hit. Evans knows the odds. But he also knows something the enemy doesn't. Those Japanese gunners, targeting from over 10 miles away, are aiming at the carriers. The slow, defenseless escort carriers of Taffy 3. The carriers are the heart of the group. If they fall, Thousands of American sailors die, and the landings on Leyte could fail. He grabs the TBS, talk between ships, microphone. Taffy 3, this is Johnston. Commencing attack. Give me a little cover fire if you can. There's a pause. Then the voice of Rear Admiral Clifton Sprague, commander of Taffy 3, crackles through the static. Godspeed, Johnston. Evans turns to his helmsman. Come to course 270. Target, lead heavy cruiser. The destroyer swings hard to port, waves crashing across her bow. Evans raises a hand. Commence firing. Johnston's 5-inch guns thunder in rapid succession. Boom, boom, boom. The ship shuddering under the recoil. The gunners work with mechanical precision, shells slamming into the Japanese cruiser Kumano. Smoke and sparks erupt from her bow as a shell detonates near the forward turret. Another hits her bridge. Direct hit! Fire on the target! A gunner yells. But the Japanese respond instantly. Dozens of shells whistle back. One strikes Johnston's forward section, blowing apart the deck plating and sending men sprawling. Shrapnel cuts through steel like paper. The destroyer lurches, smoke billowing from a gaping wound near her bow. Evans doesn't flinch. Damage control, get that fire out. Helm, steady course. Another officer hesitates. Sir, we're taking heavy hits. Then we'll give them heavier ones. Evans cuts him off. He orders the torpedo crews to stand by. The range closes rapidly. 9,000 yards, then 8, then 7. Every instinct in the crew screams to turn away. But Evans keeps charging. At 6,000 yards, he raises his arm. Launch all torpedoes. 5. Mark 15 torpedoes leave their tubes, streaking toward the Japanese cruiser like underwater missiles. Minutes later, a thunderous explosion rocks the sea. Kumano reels, her bow blown clean off. Japanese lookouts shout in alarm as she lists and slows. Crippled, Johnston veers away, engines straining. Evans allows himself a tight smile. That'll keep them guessing, but the victory is short-lived. A shell slams into the aft section, shredding the after gun mount and killing the crew there instantly. The deck is slick with oil and blood. Below, the engines cough. Power flickers. Still, Johnston fights on. Her guns blaze, her crew reloads, and her captain refuses to yield. Against overwhelming odds, a single destroyer is forcing an entire armada to turn its guns away from the carriers and toward her. On the Yamato, Admiral Kurita watches through his binoculars, his face a mask of disbelief. That destroyer, she is charging us, he mutters. Is that possible? It is. And as the Johnston disappears into a curtain of smoke, her silhouette etched against the morning sun, the Japanese fleet, the most powerful surface force ever assembled, begins to falter. Smoke rolls across the sea like a living thing, thick, gray, and bitter with cordite. Beneath it, the USS Johnston maneuvers in and out of the haze, limping but defiant. Her decks are scorched, her forward guns silent from damage, yet still she fights. Commander Ernest E. Evans grips the wheelhouse railing, his uniform soaked through with sweat and sea spray. The destroyer trembles with every volley she fires. His crew, bloodied and exhausted, reloads the remaining 5-inch guns by hand. Their faces are blackened with soot. Their hands tremble, but their eyes burn with resolve. "Captain," calls Lieutenant Bob Hagan from below, "we've lost steering control aft. Only one engine responding." Evans doesn't hesitate. "Then we'll fight with one. Keep her moving." The sound of naval gunfire is unrelenting, a chorus of thunder rolling across the Philippine Sea. The Japanese cruisers have regrouped. Chikuma and Chokai swing their massive guns toward the charging American destroyers. Over the radio, the voices of other ships cut through the static. "This is Hoel, taking heavy fire. Herman engaging cruiser to starboard. Taffy 3 under attack, requesting air support." The chaos of battle stretches in all directions. Overhead, Wildcat fighters and Avenger bombers from the escort carriers dive through clouds, attacking with machine guns and depth charges. Some pilots, out of bombs and torpedoes, drop smoke markers and even empty ammo boxes. Anything to distract the enemy. Evans peers through the binoculars again. Ahead, he spots the heavy cruiser Chikuma closing fast. Her guns blaze orange in the gloom, shells tearing the water around Johnston into boiling geysers. Target, cruiser bearing 015, load armor piercing. The gunnery crews obey, their movements automatic despite exhaustion. Fire! Johnston's guns roar again. The first salvo lands short. The second strikes home. Chikuma shudders as explosions ripple along her superstructure. The third salvo ignites her aft section in flames. But before the crew can cheer, a massive shell crashes through Johnston's bridge. The blast throws Evans against the bulkhead, tearing open his sleeve and filling the air with smoke and splinters. Blood runs down his arm, but he doesn't step back. "Keep firing," he shouts, voice hoarse. "Don't let up." Below decks, water surges through ruptured bulkheads. Damage control teams wade waist-deep, sealing leaks with makeshift plugs. Men cough from smoke, some blinded by oil and flame, yet no one abandons station. On the horizon, the crippled Chikuma begins to slow. American aircraft swoop in, finishing her with bombs and torpedoes. One more Japanese cruiser down, thanks to the Johnston's furious attack. Evans allows himself a breath. The destroyer is barely afloat, but her guns still bark defiantly. He wipes grime from his face and looks at his helmsman. "Well," he mutters, half to himself, "that ought to give him something to write home about." A young seaman, his voice shaking, says quietly, "Captain, the carriers, they're getting away." Evans nods. He knows. That was the mission. Every minute Johnston buys is another minute for the escort carriers, Fanshawe Bay, Kalinin Bay, White Plains, and the rest, to retreat eastward, out of range. But the enemy isn't done. The Yamato, finally closing the range, looses another broadside. The sea itself seems to heave in pain as the 3 200-pound shells slam into the waves. One finds its mark. The Johnston's stern erupts in a column of smoke and flame. "She's hit! Aft magazine's gone!" cries a sailor. Evans steadies himself against the bridge console. "Cease fire. Prepare to abandon ship." His voice is quiet now, measured. "You've done good, men. You've done your duty." He limps out onto the deck, wind tearing through the smoke. Around him, the ocean burns. Oil slicks aflame, wreckage floating, cries for help echoing across the waves. But the Japanese fleet is turning away. Confused by the ferocity of the American counterattack, believing they had run into a much larger force, Admiral Kurita gives the fateful order to withdraw. The Johnston, bloodied and sinking, had faced the impossible and made giants retreat. Evans looks to the horizon, where the carriers are vanishing into the mist. He smiles faintly, his voice a rasp. "This is a fighting ship. I'll never leave her." The destroyer lists hard to port. Men jump into the sea, clinging to debris. The ocean swallows the USS Johnston slowly, her flag still flying. At 10:10 a.m., she disappears beneath the waves. The battle off Samar is not over, but the legend of Ernest Evans and his crew is already written in salt and fire. The sea is eerily calm now. The roar of battle fades into the low hiss of waves against debris. Smoke lingers on the horizon, a distant smudge where the Japanese fleet once loomed. Bits of wreckage drift across the water, torn life vests, oil drums, shattered planks, and the floating bodies of men who never made it to the surface. Among the survivors of the USS Johnston, silence gives way to coughing, choking, and cries for help. Hundreds of sailors cling to what they can, life rafts, flotsam, each other. The sea is slick with oil and blood. The sun burns down mercilessly, glinting off the waves like broken glass. Seaman Second Class Lloyd Garnett drifts beside a half-submerged plank, his face black with soot. He calls out hoarsely, "Anybody from the engine room? Bob? Chief?" A faint reply comes through the smoke. "Over here, Garnett." He spots Lieutenant Bob Hagen, clinging to a splintered life raft. Hagen's eyes are red from salt and smoke. His once crisp khaki uniform is soaked and torn. Around them, the ocean stretches in every direction, endless, pitiless. They are 50 miles from the nearest land, adrift in enemy waters. For the first hour, the men wait for rescue. Then the second, then the third. By noon, the tropical sun becomes a new enemy. The oil clings to their skin, trapping heat and stinging their eyes. Some men slip beneath the surface, delirious, too exhausted to fight the waves any longer. But then, on the horizon, a faint silhouette. Another ship. At first, the men fear it's Japanese. But as the image sharpens through the haze, hope stirs. The shape is small, thin, unmistakably American. A destroyer escort, cautiously approaching the debris field. "Signal her!" someone shouts. "Over here." Men wave scraps of cloth, bang helmets against floating wreckage, anything to draw attention. Through binoculars aboard the approaching vessel, Lieutenant Commander Arthur Cap Johnson, commanding officer of the USS Fletcher, spots movement. He lowers the glasses and mutters, "My God, they're survivors." Fletcher slows to a crawl. Crewmen lean over the rails, tossing lines and life nets into the sea. "Hang on, boys," they call. "We've got you." The men of the Johnston, burned, half dead, barely conscious, are hauled aboard one by one. Each is a ghost, skin blistered, eyes hollow, uniforms shredded. But they're alive. As corpsmen tend to the wounded, one sailor whispers through cracked lips, "Is the captain aboard?" There's silence. Then a quiet voice answers, "No, Captain Evans went down with the ship." Those words pass among the survivors like a prayer. Some bow their heads, others weep openly. For hours, Commander Evans had fought like a man possessed, until the end, when he ordered his crew to abandon ship but refused to follow. His last known act was to help wounded men into the water before disappearing beneath the waves. When word of his death reaches Admiral Sprague, he says softly, "If ever a man earned the Medal of Honor, it's Ernest Evans." Days later, Japanese officers who had survived the battle would recount the same astonishment. One cruiser commander, still shaken, told interrogators after the war, "That one destroyer, she charged us like a wolf among lions. We could not believe any man would do that." Among them, even Admiral Kurita is said to have lowered his head in respect. The American destroyer captain, he reportedly told his staff, was magnificent. He fought beyond all reason. In the stillness of the Pacific, the surviving sailors of the Johnston lie on their stretchers aboard the rescue ship, staring up at the evening sky. Somewhere beneath those waters lies their ship, and the man who refused to leave her. The war rages on. But for these men, the battle off Samar will never end. October 26, 1944. Dawn over the Philippine Sea. The ocean still smells of oil and death. The morning sun glows pale behind a curtain of mist. In its light, the waves reveal scattered survivors, not only from the USS Johnston, but from other ships of Taffy 3 as well. Destroyers Howell and Samuel B. Roberts have also gone down, along with hundreds more sailors now drifting in this open graveyard of steel. For the men who survived, the battle replays in endless loops. The deafening roar of guns, the shudder of impact, the cries from below decks. Some mutter quietly to themselves, others whisper prayers. On the deck of the rescue ship USS Raymond, Ensign Bill Mercer stands beside a medic as more survivors are pulled aboard. Their bodies are mottled with burns and swollen from seawater. One of them, a machinist's mate, grips Mercer's hand weakly and rasps. "Did we get them, sir?" Mercer swallows hard. "Yeah," he says softly. "We got them." But the truth is more complicated. The Japanese fleet, Admiral Takeo Kurita's center force, had turned back. No one aboard Taffy 3 fully understood why at the time. Kurita still had enough power to annihilate the remaining American ships and perhaps reach the invasion beaches at Leyte. Yet after hours of brutal engagement with what he believed were U.S. fleet carriers, he ordered a retreat. Historians would debate that decision for decades. Some argued that confusion and fatigue clouded his judgment. Others said the fury of the American counterattack, the smoke, the torpedoes, the suicidal courage of destroyers like Johnston, convinced him he faced a much larger force. Whatever the reason, his withdrawal saved thousands of lives. The battered remnants of Taffy 3 survived, barely, but their sacrifice turned the tide of the battle. In Manila, the Japanese High Command was stunned. Kurita's force, including Yamato, Nagato, Kongo, and Haruna, had been expected to crush the Americans and reverse the invasion of the Philippines. Instead, it limped home. Reports filtered back to Tokyo. An American destroyer had charged headlong into the fleet, crippling cruisers, disrupting formations, and drawing fire away from the carriers. Kurita himself, grim-faced, confirmed it in his after-action report. "The enemy destroyer," he wrote, "displayed extraordinary determination. Her captain was fearless." He did not know the name Ernest E. Evans, but he would never forget what that lone ship had done. Back aboard the surviving American carriers, Rear Admiral Clifton Sprague walked the decks in silence. The men saluted him, but their eyes were distant, hollowed by loss and exhaustion. Smoke still clung to their uniforms. He stopped near a railing and looked east toward the rising sun. Somewhere beneath those waves lay 3 of his ships and more than 1,000 of his men. A communications officer approached, holding a crumpled notepad. "Sir, message from Sin CPAC. They're calling this a miracle of Samar." Sprague didn't answer immediately. His gaze stayed on the horizon. Then softly he said, "A miracle, bought with blood." Days later, the survivors were brought ashore in Leyte Gulf. Reporters would later describe them as men who had stared down a god. Their accounts of Evans' courage spread quickly. How he had charged alone into an enemy fleet, how he had fought until Johnston could no longer fire, how he had refused to leave his ship. One sailor, interviewed months later, said simply, "Captain Evans didn't give orders from behind. He was on the deck, bleeding, shouting to us to keep firing. He was the bravest man I ever knew." When the U.S. Navy reviewed the reports from Samar, disbelief turned to awe. The official citation for the Medal of Honor, awarded posthumously to Commander Ernest E. Evans, would later read, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty, Commander Evans daringly commanded his ship against enemy battleships and cruisers, inflicting damage far beyond the Johnston's weight of guns, until the ship, burning and shattered, was finally lost." In his photograph, later framed and hung in the halls of the Naval Academy, Evans stares straight ahead, his expression calm, resolute. Beneath the picture, a simple inscription reads, "He fought beyond all hope." But to his crew and to history, he was something more than a warrior. He was proof that courage could defy logic, that even the smallest ship could strike fear into the largest fleet on Earth. And so, in the aftermath of the inferno at Samar, when the ocean swallowed the last echoes of battle, a legend was born, one that even the enemy could not deny. October 27th, 1944, aboard the battleship Yamato. The sea is calm once more. The towering steel mountain of the Yamato glides silently across the waves, her engines thrumming deep within her armored belly. The air still reeks faintly of cordite and burning oil, the residue of yesterday's horror. Inside the flagship's wardroom, Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita sits alone with a pot of tea gone cold. His officers stand nearby, speaking in hushed voices, wary of disturbing him. The great admiral's eyes are distant, unfocused, as though still seeing the flashes of gunfire that lit the horizon the day before. Reports litter the table before him. Kumano crippled, Chikuma sunk, Suzuya burning. Thousands of men lost. All from a task force meant to crush the Americans utterly. Kurita's flag lieutenant steps forward, bowing deeply. "Admiral, the men are asking why we turned back." The admiral says nothing for a long moment. Then quietly he murmurs, "Because I believed we faced the American fast carriers." "But sir," the lieutenant ventures, "our scouts confirmed they were only escort ships, small ones." Kurita closes his eyes. "Yes, small ones, and destroyers that attacked like demons." The room falls silent. Even now the officers cannot understand it, the sheer audacity of those little ships. One destroyer, one single destroyer, had plunged into their guns, firing, charging, refusing to die. Kurita looks down at a hand-drawn report, sketched by one of the Chokai's surviving officers. It shows a lean American destroyer, smoke pouring from her decks, charging through exploding shells. Beneath it, written in rough pencil, are the words, "She fought like a wolf." The admiral exhales slowly, folding the paper. "That captain," he murmurs. "He was a warrior in the old sense. Bushido would honor such a man." Another officer, older and rigid in posture, scowls. "An American, sir? They are reckless, undisciplined." Kurita's voice cuts through the air, sharp and cold. "And yet that recklessness stopped us, did it not?" The officer bows his head. "Hi, Admiral." The truth hangs heavy in the cabin. Kurita's fleet, with its enormous guns and armored hulls, had recoiled before an enemy they should have annihilated. The admiral knows the shame of that will follow him and Japan until war's end. But deep down, he also knows something else. It was not cowardice that turned him back. It was awe. He had seen courage so raw, so impossible, that it unsettled even him. A man who had commanded in battles from the Java Sea to the Sibuyan. The image of that destroyer would not leave him. "Prepare a report for Imperial headquarters," he says finally. "Include all damage, all losses, and note in the record, the enemy's destroyer performed with remarkable skill and valor." The officers exchange uneasy glances. To praise an enemy is unthinkable, but Kurita's tone leaves no room for debate. As the men disperse, the admiral remains seated. Through the porthole, he watches the orange dusk fall across the western sea. Somewhere beneath those waters lies that destroyer, her crew entombed with their captain. Kurita lifts his cup, now cold, and mutters, almost reverently, "To die like that is to live forever." Half a world away, in a quiet intelligence office in Pearl Harbor, U.S. Navy analysts intercept fragments of Japanese radio chatter, coded summaries of the battle. They are astonished. The enemy reports mention a single destroyer that fought beyond human ability. One analyst leans back in his chair and whispers, "That has to be the Johnston." His colleague nods. "Then Evans bought the time we needed." By early November, stories of the battle off Samar sweep through the fleet. On every ship, sailors trade rumors of a destroyer that fought a battleship, of a captain who refused to retreat, of an enemy fleet that fled in disbelief. In mess halls and gun mounts, men whisper his name like a talisman, Ernest Evans, the destroyer skipper who became a legend overnight. One sailor aboard the carrier Fanshawe Bay puts it best. "If there's a heaven for fighting men, the captain's up there right now, still giving orders." In Tokyo, the naval staff buries Kurita's report in a growing pile of war dispatches. Officially, the engagement off Samar is deemed a strategic withdrawal. But within the ranks, the story spreads quietly. of the lone American ship that stood against the might of the Emperor's navy. Even the enemy could not silence that legend. As the months roll on and the empire crumbles beneath the weight of American firepower, those who survived Samar carry the memory with them, a haunting reminder of the day when courage, not numbers, decided the course of battle. April 1945, San Francisco Naval Shipyard. The war is far from over, but the battle off Samar has already passed into legend. Newsreels show footage of weary survivors disembarking at dockside hospitals. Bandaged men step into sunlight for the first time in months, their faces gaunt yet proud. Reporters swarm them, hungry for stories. One correspondent leans forward, microphone trembling. "Tell us about your captain, Commander Evans. Is it true he went down with his ship?" A survivor, still wrapped in hospital linen, nods slowly. "Yes, sir. He told us he'd never leave her." And he didn't. The reporter lowers his gaze, scribbling quietly. For a moment, the bustling pier falls silent. Even the sound of gulls seems muted by the weight of what the man has said. That night, the survivor lies awake in his bunk, haunted by dreams of steel and fire. He hears the whump of Yamato's guns, the screams of tearing metal, the echo of Evans' final command. "Fire everything we've got!" He wakes, drenched in sweat, whispering into the dark, "We did it, Captain. We stopped them." Across the Pacific, the story spreads like a spark in dry grass. At sea, sailors aboard other destroyers paint the words "Remember Samar" on their gun shields. Pilots scrawl "For Evans" on the sides of their Hellcats and Avengers before takeoff. Within the halls of the U.S. Navy's Pacific Fleet Command, officers study the battle maps of Samar. They can hardly believe the numbers. 3 destroyers and 4 escorts against 4 battleships, 8 cruisers, and 11 destroyers. Statistically, it should have been a massacre. Instead, it became a miracle. In his official dispatch, Admiral William F. Halsey writes, "The actions of Taffy 3 will live forever in the annals of naval history. No higher example of courage at sea exists." Even Fleet Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, never prone to superlatives, sends a personal message to Sprague and his surviving crews. "You have written a new chapter in the tradition of the United States Navy. Samar will be remembered as long as ships sail the sea." But the glory does little to ease the grief. Families back home receive telegrams, each one a hammer blow of sorrow. The Navy Department deeply regrets to inform you that your husband, Commander Ernest E. Evans, is missing in action and presumed lost. In Muskogee, Oklahoma, Margaret Evans reads the message at her kitchen table. The coffee grows cold in her hand as her eyes trace the words over and over. Then she looks up at the small portrait of her husband on the mantel. The man who had sworn, "I'll bring my ship back, or I'll go down with her." When his Medal of Honor is posthumously awarded a year later, she stands on the deck of the newly commissioned USS Ernest E. Evans, D.D. 963, clutching the citation. Her voice trembles as she accepts it, but her eyes are dry. "He would have said he was just doing his job," she whispers to a reporter nearby. Behind her, sailors of the new destroyer stand at attention, young, proud, and silent. They have heard the stories. They know they are walking in the shadow of a legend. In Japan, the memory of Samar lingers as well. Among surviving officers, the name Evans carries a peculiar reverence. One former Japanese captain, interviewed years later, would say quietly, "We did not understand Americans then. After Samar, we began to." He pauses, eyes distant. That destroyer fought as if possessed. It was not strategy. It was spirit. In the years that follow, as victory parades march through American streets and headlines proclaim the war's end, the veterans of Samar remain humble. When asked about their part in history, they rarely speak of heroism. They speak of loyalty, to their captain, to each other. "I don't think we were heroes," says one sailor decades later. "We were scared out of our minds." But the captain, he never flinched. So neither did we. The ocean has long since reclaimed the USS Johnston. But in every destroyer wardroom, in every officer's mess where men of the sea gather, her name is spoken with quiet respect, not just for how she fought, but for why. Because in that desperate morning off Samar, when the world seemed to tilt toward defeat, one man and his crew proved that courage alone could turn back the tide. October 30th, 2019, 75 years after the battle off Samar. Nearly 3 miles beneath the Philippine Sea, a remotely operated submersible descends into the dark. Its lights cut through an eternal blackness that has swallowed whole fleets and centuries of secrets. The vehicle's cameras scan the seabed, a ghostly landscape of twisted steel and coral. Then the light catches something unmistakable: a gun turret, a section of hull, scarred but still proud. The letters JOHNST, faintly visible beneath layers of rust and marine growth. The voice of the expedition leader, Victor Vescovo, crackles through the headset. "There she is," he whispers. The USS Johnston. For 75 years, she had slept in silence, entombed in the cold, crushing depths. Now, as the cameras drift over her shattered deck, the past awakens. Her forward gun mounts still point defiantly toward the west, the direction she charged that fateful morning. The exploration team speaks in hushed tones, as if entering a cathedral. No one dares to break the reverence. They know the story. They've read the logs, seen the faded photos of her crew, boys with wide smiles, posing on deck before the battle that would take nearly all of them. One of the divers murmurs, "She's still fighting the current." It's true. Even in ruin, the Johnston looks as though she's charging forward, eternally locked in her last glorious attack. Up above, in the control ship floating on the surface, far above the wreck, the American flag flutters in the Pacific wind. Veterans and descendants of Taffy 3 watch the live feed on screens, tears glinting in the corners of their eyes. Lloyd Garnett, one of the few surviving sailors from the Johnston's crew, now in his 90s, leans forward in his wheelchair. His voice quivers. "That's her. That's my ship." He reaches out a trembling hand toward the monitor, as though trying to touch the ghostly silhouette. The crew on deck remains silent. For Garnett, the memories flood back. The smoke, the roar of the guns, the sight of his captain on the bridge, fearless amid chaos. The cameras linger on the shattered bow, then pan toward the stern, where the ship broke apart. In the stillness, it's as though time itself has stopped. "Captain Evans is still there," Garnett says quietly. He never left her. In that moment, across the miles of ocean and decades of history, the legend of the USS Johnston feels alive again. The destroyer that defied an empire. The ship that fought until she could no longer float. The crew that proved valor isn't measured in tons of steel, but in the hearts of those who serve. When the expedition returns to port, the footage spreads across the world. News outlets carry the headline, "Wreck of heroic USS Johnston found, the ship that charged the impossible." Sailors watch from modern destroyers, silent and proud. In classrooms, history teachers tell the story to wide-eyed students. And in Muskogee, Oklahoma, the descendants of Ernest Evans gather at his memorial. They play a recording of a Navy bugler sounding taps, the notes echoing into the still evening air. Beneath the bronze plaque bearing his name are the words he lived by. "This is a fighting ship. I intend to go in harm's way. The ocean will keep its secrets. The wreck will rest undisturbed, shrouded in the eternal quiet of the deep. But her story will never fade, because every sailor who has ever gone to sea, every man who's ever faced fear and refused to yield, carries a piece of the Johnston within him. And somewhere, far below, among the rusted guns and fallen steel, The spirit of Commander Ernest E. Evans still stands on his bridge. Eyes fixed forward, hands steady on the rail, as his ship charges once more into the impossible.